Okay. Hi, my name is Tom Scholl with AT&T Labs, and this presentation is basically about maximum prefix tripping and what happens when there's leaks on the internet. So, just this kind of a disclaimer slide here to say that I'm not trying to make up or say that bad behavior of leaking is something that can be corrected by a feature. It's still bad, and you should do everything you can to prevent it with filters and things like that. But leaks are still going to happen. Not everybody gets a filter. Sometimes things get missed. Sometimes things get missed on customers. All sorts of different scenarios happen. So the option may be in a heavily paired environment that perhaps the best solution would be to perhaps allow a feature that could be still allow traffic to forward without things shutting down. So just a disclaimer, you should always filter as much as you can, as much as possible. But in the event that for whatever reason that somebody doesn't, it would be nice to have an alternative solution. So the impact of BGP leaks, where typically a pair may leak, either that could be transit routes or another pair's routes, basically something that shouldn't be out there. It has really two kind of effects. Number one, the most immediate, is that Maximum-Prefix, which is a feature that's implemented and quite prevalent in the production world, is applied on every pair with a specific limit. And in any kind of leak scenario, what happens is that Maximum-Prefix gets hit and the session goes down at that point. And at that point it requires some sort of human intervention, or it could require that on some implementations it can reset after a certain amount of minutes. But typically when it happens, it may involve humans getting involved and having to call each other and have to reset every individual connection at multiple locations. So it could be process intensive. And the other impact of doing a leak is that people may actually accept the leak. They may take something that they shouldn't have, and they may start forwarding it through your network. And while that may seem like it's free transit or whatever, chances are if a lot of people are accepting it, they're most likely forwarding a good amount of traffic, and you may not have capacity for it, and then you run into other problems. So I took a look at the last several months and looked from April to September, and there was pretty much a leak every month that occurred. Typically they were short-lived, but it does happen quite a bit. I mean, if you go on any of the mailing lists, and you typically see someone sending out on an IX mailing list saying that, hey, we tripped max prefix, can you everybody reset? I mean, that's pretty commonplace. So. And then there's the actual feature of Maximum-Prefix, which it's a good intention. You do want to restrict that in case there's a problem. You certainly don't want to accept these routes, so you just set in a limit, and once that limit's exceeded, it reacts by shutting down the session. But it's kind of like the US power grid, where there's some sort of overload and everything shuts down. So another side effect too as well is, let's say you did exceed other people's maximum prefix. Let's say you did have a leak going out. Your own routers won't even tell you the reason why the session went down. You'll typically see a message, perhaps something like malformed update, malformed attributes, and you'll repeatedly see this every time the session tries to come up. So it doesn't really tell you exactly why, and if you see this happening to multiple pairs at once, you may not be sure what happened. So I have some ideas on possibly making this better, and it's around kind of the idea of where, let's say you exceed maximum prefix. When you exceed that numeric limit, perhaps suppress anything learned after that point. That way you continue forwarding the prefixes that you're already aware of. But it kind of requires a little bit of intelligence, because a lot of things can happen after that prefix is exceeded. As well as you also are assuming that a leak is something that's sudden, that happens within a small defined time, such as 30 seconds or 60 seconds, which typically it is, but you never know. So the idea would be that you want to keep the session up, you want to keep forwarding traffic to what you know about, and you just kind of want to ignore what was the leak. So the idea behind this is perhaps you set a value similar to how you do today with maximum prefix, and you define some time intervals, particularly maybe 1 minute before the event could occur and 1 minute after. And whenever you do have a BGP pair that does exceed, anything learned after that point is just kind of marked as suppressed and is not added into the BGP decision process. And if you can, you specify a time limit that says, okay, someone just exceeded maximum prefix. Take all the prefixes I learned in the last minute, throw them out, mark them as suppressed, but continue to process things like withdraws and things like that. And then here, when the pair actually does go below whatever the limit was, at that point, wait for some sort of period, maybe 1 minute, and request a route refresh. And if the pairing count is still below, if the prefix count is still below what the maximum prefix is, then declare the pair is okay, and then rerun the BGP decision process. And here's just a kind of a little image of what it would look like, so you could probably read that later. But then, of course, there could be potential problems with something like this. For example, may more memory be required on the router to hold this, to do a compare of the adjacency in tables. Also, you'd have to figure out a way to timestamp the BGP updates, which in most implementations I thought they already do, but so that's another thing you have to worry about. And what do you do about a pair that keeps leaking up and down, up and down? Do you want to continually run this process for hours and hours? I mean, who knows what the impact is on the CPU, so you may want to actually have another knob in there to say if this has happened more than X amount of times, maybe you do want to shut it down at that point or some other kind of action. And then, of course, what happens if the leak is slow and gradual and not a sudden burst? There's not much you can do in that case. So, and then there's some other additional things that are related to Maximum-Prefix that are kind of gripes. Different vendors have different implementation. Cisco, they do their operation post-policy. Juniper does it pre-policy. It'd be nice if both vendors could support both. And Eric Bell years ago used to say maybe we can have a maximum prefix outbound. Even though, yes, you should always be aware of what your filters are and control your own network, but perhaps like a last-ditch effort is have a maximum prefix outbound just in case. Hopefully it's a one-line command. It won't be too hard to do. And then there's also an issue in Cisco. They have a unique regex bug, which sometime this summer somebody had a certain AS path, somewhat complex AS path access list that should have worked, and it didn't, and it was related to a bug, so it would be nice to get that fixed. And then some other knobs that would be nice related to BGP session management, and that would be things like it would be great to communicate, and there's already been some drafts over the last few years, but I'm not sure really what happened to them, but the way to actually send a message to a BGP pair that would show up in their syslog or some sort of a logging event monitor on the router. So if you had a planned maintenance, you could, and the router's going to go down, you could send a message to every pair that would say something like, okay, we're reloading, we're doing code upgrades, it's going to be down for 2 hours, here's the knock if you need anything, something like that. So it does, you remove the process on the back end of why did this pair go down, I have to go call up the knock, find out what's going on. It'd be nice if we could do something like that. Do things like administrative shutdown a pair. I mean, you could use your imagination for why you might want to do that. And then you could say something to a pair like, hey, you're approaching maximum prefix. Obviously, you might want to fix this. And then actually when the session is shut down for maximum prefix, it would be nice if they actually told you why, rather than just sever the session and then you see some vague update messages. And then you could say things comical like pay your bills if they haven't paid. So that's pretty much about it. So any questions?
So have you talked to any of our favorite router vendors about this?
No, not yet.
Okay.
I would like to see something maybe like a draft or something get started and then push on them, and hopefully customers will say, yeah, this is a real issue with, because it happens frequently, and it shouldn't happen, but it still does, and maybe we need to just try to at least have this knob in there. But obviously, people have to support it. So.
Okay.
Jeff Houston. This is a relatively old conversation and certainly not the first time it's been brought up. There have been various proposals kicking around, including high and low mark thresholds. The fundamental observation that's always been with max prefix is that when you exceed it, is tearing down the session the right thing to do, or is hobbling along a better thing to do? Normally the way these conversations have then continued is that when you trigger at that limit, rather than tearing down the session, you simply don't accept prefixes that would add to the count. You can accept updates on existing ones you have and withdrawals, but you wouldn't accept any more prefixes until you get below a low water threshold. That conversation has been conducted with vendors over some years in various contexts, and I think if you look very hard you might find some implementations of it squirreled around somewhere. It, though, is still a matter of theology rather than engineering, whether when you get a prefix leak, it's better to zot your peer out of existence or simply continue with the prefixes that got you to the limit. And I've seen proponents either way and no clear answer.
It's a good point, and I mean, if there are implementations out there, I'd be curious to see them. But yeah, I mean, that's really the question. If you're doing a pair with you're having multiple gigs, do you really want to reroute that because of a momentary misapplication of a filter, which may be corrected within several minutes? But yeah, I guess if people really want it, they should be asking for it.
The people who were in favour of tearing down the session was the only way you get the attention of the operations folk is to rip the session apart. I always thought this was a rather brutal way of getting someone's attention, but there you go.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.